Hello and welcome back to Public Domain Book Club Hour, reading The Sign of the Four, chapters 5 through 7, take 2. This time with my microphone turned on. Yeah. This whole series has been an extended equipment test, and last week I was struck down by my own hubris due to the fact I simply... Well, okay. I'm not going to blame OBS because it's not OBS's fault that I'm an idiot. I am still scared of OBS, as I have mentioned several times, since Twitch decided to discontinue Twitch Studio, which is fine. Like, I get it. No one uses it because it is baby mode for babies, but hey, apparently I'm a baby. Apparently I needed the idiot-proofed, streamer software. Because I am back on Streamlabs again this week because I, streamed for a whole hour last week with my mic muted. We're not going to talk about it anymore. That happened, but has been redacted off the internet, and we're going to do chapters 5 through 7 again tonight. And so if I, make silly pronunciation mistakes, it's my own damn fault for not figuring it out, since this is take 2 and I am admitting that. Yeah. I am currently consuming 3 different coffee-themed beverages, one of which is my water, one of which is a protein shake, and the third of which may or may not contain alcohol, depending on if Twitch allows me to say that out loud, which I don't remember right now, so plausible deniability. It's also 1 a.m. instead of 11. I actually have a good excuse. I was touring a venue with my roommate who produces the Cat's Shadowcast that I am Mr. Mistopheles on a unicycle for. So that's why it's 2 hours later than usual and in the middle of the goddamn night with so much coffee. But that's because I work with tourists and don't have to exist on Tuesdays. So I can have as much 1 a.m. coffee as I want, and I'm choosing yes. Alright, I'm gonna stop stalling and dive back in to reading The Sign of the Four, chapters 5 through 7. This time with a working microphone. Actually, yeah, like, I'm not going to blame OBS. It's not OBS's fault. Open source software is an absolute necessity and something that I passionately believe in. However, OBS has made me cry a statistically significant amount of times, and that's why I have chickened out and I'm doing this on Streamlabs. OBS has made me cry because during the pandemic, I was in musical theater school, and so we had to do assignments like our voice juries and self-tapes, because even though we are I was in a stage acting program during the pandemic, they tried to teach us some film acting stuff, because what else were we supposed to do? It was a disaster, etc. But I simply had too many. I have theater kid activities due at 11:59, and OBS is making my life a living hell. Probably because I'm a dumbass. Like, I will fully acknowledge it's probably my own damn fault. Because open source software is, in fact, a beautiful thing that the world needs more of, and I am strongly in favor of, and should be using. However, I am sometimes a little bitch boy, and I will make friends with OBS one day, but that day was not last Monday! This is the protein coffee. Chapter 5. The Tragedy of Pondicherry Lodge. It was nearly 11 o'clock when we reached this final stage of our night's adventures. I'm going to triple check my microphone. Yes, we are alive and well. Just got paranoid for a second, sorry. We had left the damp fog of the great city behind us, and the night was fairly fine. A warm wind blew from the westward, and heavy clouds moved slowly across the sky, with a half-moon peeping occasionally through the rifts. It was clear enough to see for some distance, but Thaddeus Sholto took down one of the side lamps from the carriage to give us a better light upon our way. Pondicherry Lodge stood in its own grounds, and was girt round with a very high stone wall topped with broken glass. A single, narrow, iron-clamped door formed the only means of entrance. On this our guide knocked with a peculiar postman-like rat-tat. "Who is there?" cried a gruff voice from within. "It is I, McMurdo. You surely know my knock by this time." There was a grumbling sound and a clanking and jarring of keys. The door swung heavily back, and a short, deep-chested man stood in the opening, with the yellow light of the lantern shining upon his protruded face and twinkling distrustful eyes. "That you, Mr. Thaddeus? But who are the others? I had no orders about them from the master." "No, McMurdo, you surprise me. I told my brother last night that I should bring some friends." "He ain't been out of his room today, Mr. Thaddeus, and I have no orders. You know very well that I must stick to regulations. I can let you in, but your friends must stop just where they are." This was an unexpected obstacle. Thaddeus Sholto looked about him in a perplexed and helpless manner. "This is too bad of you, McMurdo," he said. "If I guarantee them, that is enough for you. There's the young lady, too. She cannot wait on the public road at this hour." "Very sorry, Mr. Thaddeus," said the porter inexorably. "Folk may be friends of yours and yet no friends of the master's. He pays me well to do my duty, and my duty I'll do. I don't know none of your friends." "Oh, yes, you do, McMurdo," cried Sherlock Holmes genially. "I don't think you can have forgotten me. Don't you remember the amateur who fought 3 rounds with you at Allison's rooms on the night of your benefit 4 years back?" "Not Mr. Sherlock Holmes," roared the prize fighter. "God's truth, how could I have mistook you? Instead of standing there so quiet, had you just stepped up and given me that cross hit of yours under the jaw, I'd have known you without question. Ah, you're the one who's wasted your gifts, you have. You might have aimed high if you joined the fancy." "You see, Watson, if all else fails me, I still have one of the scientific professions open to me," said Holmes, laughing. "Our friend won't keep us out in the cold now, I'm sure." "In you come, sir, in you come, you and your friends," he answered. "Very sorry, Mr. Thaddeus, but orders are very strict. Had to be certain of your friends before I let them in." Inside, a gravel path wound through the desolate grounds to a huge clump of a house, square and prosaic, all plunged in shadow save where a moonbeam struck one corner and glimmered in a garret window. The vast size of the building, with its gloom and its deathly silence, struck a chill to the heart. Even Thaddeus Sholto seemed ill at ease, and the lantern quivered and rattled in his hand. "I cannot understand it," he said. "There must be some mistake. I distinctly told Bartholomew that we should be here, yet there is no light in his window. I do not know what to make of it." "Does he always guard the premises this way?" asked Holmes. "Yes. He has followed my father's custom. He was the favorite son, you know, and I sometimes think that my father may have told him more than he ever told me. That is Bartholomew's window up there where the moonshine strikes. It is quite bright, but there is no light from within, I think." "None," said Holmes. "But I see the glint of a light in that little window beside the door." "Ah, that is the housekeeper's room. That is where old Miss Burnstone sits. She can tell us all about it. But perhaps you would not mind waiting here for a minute or two, for if we all go in together and she has no word of our coming, she may be alarmed. But hush! What is that?" He held up the lantern, and his hand shook until the circles of light flickered and wavered all around us. Miss Morstan seized my wrist, and we all stood with thumping hearts, straining our ears. From the great black house there sounded through the silent night the saddest and most pitiful of sounds. The shrill, broken whimpering of a frightened woman. "It is Miss Burnstone," said Sholto. "She is the only woman in the house. Wait here, I shall be back in a moment." He hurried for the door and knocked in his peculiar way. We could see a tall old woman admit him, and sway with pleasure at the very sight of him. "Oh, Mr. Thaddeus, sir, I'm so glad you've come. I'm so glad you've come, Mr. Thaddeus, sir." We heard her reiterated rejoicings until the door was closed and her voice died away into a muffled monotone. Our guide had left us the lantern. Holmes swung it slowly round and peered keenly at the house and at the great rubbish heaps which cumbered the grounds. Miss Morstan and I stood together, and her hand was in mine. A wondrous subtle thing is love, for here we were, two who had never seen each other before that day, between whom no word or even look of affection had ever passed, and yet now in an hour of trouble our hands instinctively sought for each other. I have marveled at it since, but at the time it seemed the most natural thing that I should go out to her so, and, as she has often told me, there was in her also the instinct to turn to me for comfort and protection. So we stood hand in hand like two children, and there was peace in our hearts for all the dark things that surrounded us. "What a strange place," she said, looking round. "It looks as though all the moles in England had been let loose in it. I have seen something of the sort on the side of a hill near Ballarat, where the prospectors had been at work." "And from the same cause," said Holmes. "There are traces of the treasure-seekers. You must remember that they were 6 years looking for it. No wonder that the grounds look like a gravel pit." At that moment the door of the house burst open, and Thaddeus Sholto came running out with his hands thrown forward and terror in his eyes. "There is something amiss with Bartholomew," he cried. "I am frightened. My nerves cannot stand it." He was indeed half blubbering with fear, and his twitching, feeble face peering out from the great astrakhan collar, and had the helpless, appealing expression of a terrified child. "Come into the house," said Holmes, in his crisp, firm way. "Yes, do," pleaded Thaddeus Sholto. "I really do not feel equal to giving directions." We all followed him into the housekeeper's room, which stood upon the left-hand side of the passage. The old woman was pacing up and down with a scared look and restless, picking fingers, but the sight of Miss Morstan appeared to have a soothing effect on her. "God bless your sweet, calm face," she cried with a hysterical sob. "It does me good to see you. Oh, but I have been sorely tried this day." Our companion patted her thin, work-worn hand, and murmured some few words of kindly, womanly comfort which brought the color back into the other's bloodless cheeks. "Master has locked himself in and will not answer me," she explained. "All day I have waited to hear from him, for he so often likes to be alone, but an hour ago I feared that something was amiss, so I went up and peeped through the keyhole. You must go up, Mr. Thaddeus, you must go up and look for yourself. I have seen Mr. Bartholomew Sholto in joy and in sorrow for 10 long years, but I never saw him with such a face on him as that." Sherlock Holmes took the lamp and led the way, for Thaddeus Sholto's teeth were chattering in his head. So shaken was he that I had to pass my hand under his arm as we went up the stairs, for his knees were trembling under him. Twice, as we ascended, Holmes whipped his lens out of his pocket and carefully examined marks which appeared to me to be mere shapeless smudges of dust upon the cocoanut matting which served as a stair-carpet. He walked slowly from step to step, holding the lamp and shooting keen glances to right and left. Miss Morstan had remained behind with the frightened housekeeper. The third flight of stairs ended in a straight passage of some length, with a great picture in Indian tapestry upon the right of it, and 3 doors upon the left. Holmes advanced along it in the same slow and methodical way, while we kept close at his heels with our long, black shadows streaming backwards down the corridor. The 3rd door was that which we were seeking. Holmes knocked without receiving any answer, and then tried to turn the handle and force it open. It was locked on the inside, however, and by a broad and powerful bolt, as we could see when we set our lamp up against it. The key being turned, however, the hole was not entirely closed. Sherlock Holmes bent down to it and instantly rose again with a sharp intaking of the breath. "There is something devilish in this, Watson," said he, more moved than I had ever before seen him. "What do you make of it?" I stooped to the hole and recoiled in horror. Moonlight was streaming into the room, and it was bright with a vague and shifty radiance. Looking straight at me, and suspended as it were in the air, for all beneath was in shadow, there hung a face, the very face of our companion Thaddeus. There was the same high, shining head, the same circular bristle of red hair, the same bloodless countenance. The features were set, however, in a horrible smile, a fixed and unnatural grin, which in that still and moonlit room was more jarring to the nerves than any scowl or contortion. So like was the face to that of our little friend that I looked around at him to make sure that he was indeed with us. Then I recalled to mind that he had mentioned to us that his brother and he were twins. "This is terrible," I said to Holmes. "What is to be done?" "The door must come down," he answered, and springing against it, he put all his weight upon the lock. It creaked and groaned, but did not yield. Together we flung ourselves upon it once more, and this time it gave way with a sudden snap, and we found ourselves within Bartholomew Sholto's chamber. It appeared to have been fitted up as a chemical laboratory. A double line of glass-stoppered bottles was drawn up against the wall opposite the door, and the table was littered over with Bunsen burners, test tubes, and retorts. In the corners stood carboys of acid in wicker baskets. One of these appeared to leak or to have been broken, for a stream of dark-colored liquid had trickled out from it, and the air was heavy with a particularly pungent, tar-like odor. A set of steps stood at one side of the room, in the midst of a litter of lath and plaster, and above them was an opening in the ceiling large enough for a man to pass through. At the foot of the steps, a long coil of rope was thrown carelessly together. By the table, in a wooden armchair, the master of the house was seated all in a heap, with his head sunk upon his left shoulder, and that ghastly, inscrutable smile upon his face. He was stiff and cold, and had clearly been dead many hours. It seemed to me that not only his features, but all his limbs were twisted and turned in the most fantastic fashion. By his hand upon the table there lay a peculiar instrument, a brown, close-grained stick, with a stone head like a hammer, rudely lashed on with coarse twine. Beside it was a torn sheet of notepaper with some words scrawled upon it. Holmes glanced at it, then handed it to me. "You see," he said, with a significant raising of the eyebrows. In the light of the lantern, I read with a thrill of horror, "The sign of the 4. "In God's name, what does it all mean?" I asked. "It means murder," said he, stooping over the dead man. "Ah, I expected it. Look here." He pointed to what looked like a long, dark thorn stuck in the skin just above the ear. "It looks like a thorn," said I. "It is a thorn. You may pick it out, but be careful, for it is poisoned." I took it up between my finger and thumb. It came away from the skin so readily that hardly any mark was left behind. One tiny speck of blood showed where the puncture had been. "This is all an insoluble mystery to me," said I. "It grows darker instead of clearer." "On the contrary," he answered, "it clears every instant. I only require a few missing links to have an entirely connected case." We had almost forgotten our companion's presence since we entered the chamber. He was still standing in the doorway, the very picture of terror, wringing his hands and moaning to himself. Suddenly, however, he broke out into a sharp, querulous cry. "The treasure is gone," he said. "They have robbed him of the treasure. There's the hole through which we lowered it. I helped him to do it. I was the last person who saw him. I left him here last night, and I heard him lock the door as I came downstairs." "What time was that?" "It was 10 o'clock, and now he is dead, and the police will be called in, and I shall be suspected of having had a hand in it. Oh, yes, I'm sure I shall, but you don't think so, gentlemen. Surely you don't think that it was I. Is it likely that I would have brought you here if it were I? Oh, dear, I know that I shall go mad." He jerked his arms and stamped his feet in a kind of convulsive frenzy. "You have no reason to fear, Mr. Sholto," said Holmes, kindly, putting his hand upon his shoulder. "Take my advice and drive down to the station to report this matter to the police. Offer to assist them in every way. We shall wait here until you return." The little man obeyed in a half-stupefied fashion, and we heard him stumbling down the stairs in the dark. Chapter 6. Sherlock Holmes gives a demonstration. "Now, Watson," said Holmes, rubbing his hands, "we have half an hour to ourselves. Let us make good use of it. My case is, as I have told you, almost complete, but we must not err on the side of overconfidence. Simple as the case seems now, there may be something deeper underlaying it." "Simple?" I ejaculated. "Ah, yes. All of the moments, in the original Sherlock Holmes stories where it gets, like, screen capped a lot. The using ejaculated as exclaimed, and, of course, that has a very different connotation now, but it did just mean exclaimed at the time. But it makes for good memes. I could probably turn down my light a bit and be... No? No? You know, I even have to go outside sometimes for my job, and it still takes turning down the light until I maybe look like I'm in a nature documentary. That was one too many. And I still look like a goddamn ghost. Hello, do you want to focus, camera? I know. There we go. I know. I look like some sort of ghoulish... There we go. Okay, sorry. I was trying to make sure the camera focused, and so it wouldn't be blurry and irritating. "Simple," I ejaculated. "Surely," said he, with something of the air of a clinical professor expounding to his class. "Just sit in the corner there, that your footprints may not complicate matters. Now to work. In the first place, how did these folk come, and how did they go? The door has not been opened since last night. How of the window?" He carried the lamp across to it, muttering his observations aloud all the while, but addressing them to himself rather than to me. "Window is snibbed on the inner side, framework is solid, no hinges at the side. Let us open it. No water pipe near, roof quite out of reach, yet a man has mounted by the window. It rained a little last night. Here's the print of a foot in mould upon the sill, and here's a circular muddy mark, and here again upon the floor, and here again by the table. See here, Watson, this really is a very pretty demonstration." I looked at the round, well-defined muddy discs. "This is not a footmark," said I. "It is something much more valuable to us. It is the impression of a wooden stump. You see, here on the sill is the boot mark, a heavy boot with the broad metal heel, and beside it, the mark of the timber toe. It is the wooden-legged man." "Quite so, but there's been someone else, a very able and efficient ally. Could you scale that wall, Doctor?" I looked out the open window. The moon still shone brightly on that angle of the house. We were a good 60 feet from the round, and look where I would, I could see no foothold, nor as much as a crevice in the brickwork. "It is absolutely impossible," I answered. "Without aid it is so, but suppose you had a friend up here who lowered you this good stout rope which I see in the corner, securing one end of it to this great hook in the wall. Then, I think, if you were an active man, you might swarm up, wooden leg and all. You would depart, of course, in the same fashion, and your ally would draw up the rope, untie it from the hook, shut the window, snip it on the inside, and get away in the way he originally came. As a minor point, it may be noted," he continued, fingering the rope, "that our wooden-legged friend, though a fair climber, was not a professional sailor. His hands were far from horny." We just stopped to cover the changing connotation of the word ejaculated, and they go fingering the rope, and his hands were not horny in the same goddamn sentence. I have nothing else to add. That speaks for itself. My lens discloses more than one blood mark, especially towards the end of the rope, from which I gather that he slipped down with such velocity that he took the skin off his hand. This is all very well, said I, but the thing becomes more unintelligible than ever. How about this mysterious ally? How came he into the room? Yes, the ally, repeated Holmes pensively. There are features of interest about this ally. He lifts the case from the regions of the commonplace. I fancy that this ally breaks fresh ground in the annals of crime in this country, though parallel cases suggest themselves from India, and if memory serves me, from Senegambia. How come he, then? I reiterated. The door is locked. The window is inaccessible. Was it through the chimney? The grate is much too small, he answered. I had already considered that possibility. How then? I persisted. You will not apply my precept, he said, shaking his head. How often have I said to you that when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth? We know that he did not come through the door, the window, or the chimney. We also know that he could not have been concealed in the room, as there is no concealment possible. Whence, then, did he come? He came through the hole in the roof, I cried. Of course he did. He must have done so. If you will have the kindness to hold the lamp for me, we shall now extend our researches to the room above, the secret room in which the treasure was found. He mounted the steps, and seizing a rafter with either hand, he swung himself up into the garret. Then, lying on his face, he reached down for the lamp and held it while I followed him. The chamber in which we found ourselves was about 10 feet one way and 6 the other. The floor was formed by the rafters, with thin lath and plaster between, so that in walking one had to step from beam to beam. The roof ran up to an apex, and was evidently the inner shell of the true roof of the house. There was no furniture of any sort, and the accumulated dust of years lay thick upon the floor. Here you are, you see, said Sherlock Holmes, putting his hand upon the stooping wall. There is a gnat. My apologies. I'm not. Sorry. You know when a gnat just touches you out of nowhere? And it's extra maddening because, like, okay, I have the visual snow / visual static TM. For anyone with ADHD or any of the other neurodivergencies that run common in the sort of people that are likely to listen to me, you're not supposed to see a continuous, like, screen of static about your vision. That is, in fact, not normal, and is a presumably neurological, but they have not quite done the research into what or why it happens. There's not supposed to be shaky dots all the time forever in your field of vision. Mine has progressed to a point where I don't feel comfortable driving, which is why I moved to the city. But for a lot of people, it is mild enough that it doesn't interfere with anything. Yeah. I was in my, like, second year of college, and there was a moment when I noticed that, like, oh, hey, this thing I've experienced all my life is suddenly worse now. And yeah. It does not always progress, though. So if you experience this, 1, it is not normal, but 2, it does not always become a problem. I've got enough other crap going on with my brain and body that it does not surprise me that my vision got weird and weirder. But that also means that if there's, like, a small flying insect, I'm not sharp enough to, like, grab it out of the air because it is but one of a bajillion moving dots in my field of vision. Yeah, not to panic everyone, because when I had the, oh, what do you mean that's not normal, epiphany, I then found out that a bunch of my friends also have it, but, like, not to drop the AJ lore, I have been in, like, too many car accidents. None of them serious, but there is a point at which on the phone with my father when I was like, hey, I don't think I should be driving anymore, where I literally was just like, and how many car accidents have I been in? And he was like, okay, fair point. Because the correct number of car accidents to be in as a person is none. But alas, yeah. I was never a good driver. And so I moved to the only city in this goddamn country where you can rely on public transportation to live a full and independent life. Yeah. Because I don't know whether or not my vision will suddenly get more staticky again. Like, I could be consistent at this level for the rest of my life, or my brain could do what it did in my second year of college and be like, hey, guess what? The static's thicker now. You like seeing? No, you don't. Yeah. And it comes with, I think the least fair thing is that it commonly presents with both sensitivity to light and also night blindness. It's like you would think that you would either be photosensitive as shit or have terrible night vision, but it's just like, and I know that I'm an absolute fucking rat bastard because I will do things in the dark that probably require light to do. It's just like I will be like in the kitchen getting a snack in the dark in the middle of the goddamn night, because my brain is so used to the fact that processing visual input through the static takes effort that if I'm just vibing, my brain just tries not to use my eyes, which is not a good idea. Like, cognitively process the visual information, but no. It's just like, I will just do stuff without fully... yeah, I call it... I say I'm not using my eyes, but it's like, I'm not... When I say that, I mean I'm not processing in any granular detail the visual information, because sorting the useful, seeing details through the static requires an amount of effort that my brain doesn't like to do if it's not necessary. So it's just like, I'll just be in the dark. Again, I don't have good dark vision. I also have absolute rat shit vision in bright lighting or yellow toned lighting. Yeah. This stream is conducted under an ungodly, crisp white light because, the night shift setting on iPhones or any other, add in more yellow light and take out the blue light so that your brain will go to sleep better. Hurts to look at. My eyes and brain do not like to process yellow toned lighting. Like, it doesn't quite hurt unless I really push it, but for whatever reason, I'm just wired backwards on the blue toned lighting is so much more comfortable for me to look at and process. So that's why I'm a little bit overexposed lighting wise. And also why I'm not, like, if I ever try to lighting design something, it's gonna be god-awful for normal people to look at. So it would have to be, like, if I ever lighting design something and caustic is not artistically intended, don't let me do it. Because I naturally gravitate towards blue shift lighting, which is, firstly, more unnatural and the kind of lighting that most people are more sensitive to, but it truly is the only lighting conditions that, like, get my brain to go, oh yeah, we should probably look at that. Yeah. So, if you are neurodivergent and have some vision weirdness, perhaps present the idea of it could be it's either called visual snow, visual static. It does not have a fancy scientific name yet. They don't really know what causes it. And again, it is usually a mild, non-obtrusive condition. But if you do see static all the time, that has a name and is not, in fact, normal. But yeah. So I basically decided that it was the better call for me to plan my life around not driving, because I don't feel... Firstly, I should not be driving, like, ever around sunrise or sunset, because I can also give myself migraines from reflected sunlight. Probably other things. But in the past 10 years, the only thing that has ever given me a migraine is catching a bad angle of reflected sunlight. Because I got migraines like crazy in middle school. Migraines are also extremely common, like, co-occurrence for people with visual snow. There's some neurological thing that they haven't fully done research into, because it's hard to get funding for this shit. But so migraines and visual snow, visual static are very common together. I know that I will get photosensitive migraines under very specific conditions. It does really have to be, like, reflected sunlight straight into my eyeballs, and that tends to happen more at, like, sunrise and sunset than other times of day. So, like, but if you think about it, when are people typically going to and coming home from work? So if I were to rely on being able to drive myself, that's a migraine risk. And more so than the headache part of having a migraine, what gets me into trouble is the fact that it just completely shuts my brain down. Like, when I would get migraines in middle school, I would not be able to form coherent sentences in English. Or any language. Like, I would forget every word in the English language and not be able to put together a sentence to explain to my teachers or the school nurse what was going on. Which was really scary, because I was like fucking 12. And when you're fucking 12, and 1, you have an excruciating headache, and 2, you can't remember any words that haven't been said to you in the past minute. Which is fucking terrifying. but also really hard to explain, because how do you communicate that you are in excruciating pain, terrified, without language? So that was a whole thing. I have gotten one migraine in the past 10 years, and it was because I was trying to identify a species of wasp, and I caught a bad reflection off of a car windshield. Not my car windshield. It was just like a passing car. While I was trying to look at the wasp, because I wanted to know what kind of wasp it was. I still don't know what kind of wasp it was, because instead of identifying the wasp species, I got a fucking migraine. Yeah. So, I know that it's for the best that I have chosen to plan my life around being able to take public transit. That's why I moved to the city, because it drives me up the goddamn wall that there are so few places that you can live and not be car dependent in America. Sucks ass. But powerful people make too much money off of it to change things. So I moved to New York, because to be able to commute to and from work often requires driving at sunrise and sunset, which is a migraine risk. And you can't live a life where you're on your way to work and you catch a bad reflection off of a car windshield and suddenly your day is canceled. That's just not a sustainable life. So I moved to the city, and I've been doing great. And I'm almost a year at my current job, so thriving, but it sucks that there's only really the one place in the country that it's possible for me to live a reliable, sustainable, independent life. God, I'm not gonna go on a crazy rant right now about... I've got a silly little theory, and I have, spouted this to my other chronically ill disabled friends, that the amount of car dependence in America allows people to pretend that they are physically okay and ignore the fact that they have mobility restrictions or other disabilities, because being disabled is so high. Hi, happy Disability Pride Month. This rant is now, relevant. I did not realize how restrained my mobility was until I was thinking about what it would take for me to not be driving. Because, for example, I'm 10 minutes from a train line, from the train line I need to get to work. But in order to be able to reliably and sustainably walk for 10 minutes, I have to use forearm crutches, or just the one. I actually don't quite have the coordination to use both crutches at the same time. I need to do that, because if I ever happen to, like, get an acute injury, like rolling my ankle or something, which will probably happen at some point because my joints are made of garbage. Hi. Welcome to Public Domain Book Club Hour, where I ramble about bullshit. I would need to be able to use both, but I just don't have the coordination. I feel like a spider. When I try to use both crutches, I feel like a spider. I have too many legs and I don't know where my bones are. I never know where my bones are. We love the catch-22 of hypermobile conditions giving you garbage rat shit proprioception. I was talking about the car thing. The car thing being, I was able to ignore the fact that I could not safely and sustainably walk for more than like 3 to 5 minutes, because when I lived somewhere where everyone drives everywhere, how often do you have to walk more than 3 to 5 minutes? And so I know for a goddamn fact, but I can't fucking prove it, that there are a lot of people who are disabled, have mobility issues, but are able to avoid confronting the reality of that by being extremely car dependent. Because being extremely car dependent is so normalized that people are able to just pretend they're fine and ignore their health issues, which causes more problems in the long run. But by going, oh, I can just drive everywhere I need to go and I don't need to be able to walk more than 5 minutes. I know it's true, but I just can't prove it. Because again, disabilities are so heavily stigmatized that people are willing to hurt themselves to pretend they're fine. And I'm the weird one for figuring out what it takes for me to be okay. ... etc. Moving on now. Well, not a primary precept. Yes, we did that bit. The chamber in which we found ourselves was about... this is going back a little bit, but I've been talking for a while, so let's just go back a little bit. The chamber in which we found ourselves was about 10 feet one way and 6 the other. The floor was formed by the rafters, with thin lath and plaster between, so that in walking one had to step from one beam to beam. The roof ran up to an apex, and was evidently the inner shell of the true roof of the house. There was no furniture of any sort, and the accumulated dust of years lay thick upon the floor. "Here you are, you see," said Sherlock Holmes, putting his hand against the sloping wall. "This is a trap door which leads out onto the roof. I can press it back, and here is the roof itself, sloping at a gentle angle. This, then, is the way by which number 1 entered. Let us see if we can find any other traces of his individuality." He held down the lamp to the floor, and as he did so I saw for the second time that night a startled, surprised look come over his face. For myself, as I followed his gaze, my skin was cold under my clothes. The floor was covered thickly with the prints of a naked foot, clear, well-defined, perfectly formed, but scarce half the size of those of an ordinary man. "Holmes," I said in a whisper, "a child has done the horrid thing." Not gonna say more words right now, but the just like, yes, tiny feet means child and or woman. And it's just like, I, personally, wear a size children's 3 shoe. Not to enter the extremely fucking long list of absolutely out-of-pocket shit that people say to me in public. Mostly because, as a mobility aid user, people have questions that I would love to be able to answer on my terms and have been planning to make content talking about, because I think it is important to talk about. I think it is a lot of things that people don't know, don't understand, because they haven't had the personal first-hand experience with, and that needs to be discussed. But the time and place for having that discussion is not in fucking Kroger. But less out of pocket. There was one time when I was in line at a grocery store and the lady behind me was just like, "Wow, your feet are tiny." Keeping in mind, I had shoes on, size children's 3 shoes. And it was just like, What size shoes do you wear? Children's 3. Please, ma'am, can I just buy my fucking eggs and go home? No? Alright. Cool. We're having this conversation. Sure, I've got tiny feet. It's whatever. I also have to wear snug shoes or else I can feel the bones in my feet separating from each other because my joints are made of garbage. And there are so many goddamn tiny fucking bones in the human foot. He had recovered his self-possession in an instant. I was staggered for the moment, he said, but the thing is quite natural. My memory failed me, or I should have been able to foretell it. There is nothing more to be learned here. Let us go down. What is your theory, then, as to those footmarks? I asked eagerly when we had regained the lower room once more. My dear Watson, try a little analysis yourself, said he with a touch of impatience. You know my methods. Apply them, and it will be instructive to compare results. I cannot conceive anything which will cover the facts, I answered. It will be clear enough to you soon, he said in an offhand way. I think that there is nothing else of importance here, but I will look. He whipped out his lens and a tape measure and hurried about the room on his knees, measuring, comparing, examining, with his long, thin nose only a few inches from the planks, and his beady eyes gleaming and deep-set like those of a bird. So swift, silent, and furtive were his movements, like those of a trained bloodhound picking out a scent, that I could not think what a terrible criminal he would have made had he turned his energy and sagacity against the law instead of exerting them in its defense. As he hunted about, he kept muttering to himself, and finally he broke out into a loud crow of delight. We are certainly in luck, said he. We ought to have very little trouble now. Number 1 has had the misfortune to tread in the creosote. You can see the outline of the edge of his small foot here at the side of this evil-smelling mess. The carboy has been cracked, you see, and the snuff has leaked out. And the stuff has leaked out. What then? I asked. Why, we've got him, that's all, said he. I know a dog that would follow that scent to the world's end. If a pack can track a trailed herring across a shire, how far can a specially trained hound follow so pungent a smell as this? It sounds like a sum in the rule of 3. The answer should give us the— But halloo, here are the accredited representatives of the law. Heavy steps and the clamor of loud voices were audible from below, and the hall door shut with a loud crash. Before they come, said Holmes, just put your hand here on this poor fellow's arm, and here on his leg. What do you feel? His muscles are as hard as a board, I answered. Quite so. They are in a state of extreme contraction, far exceeding the regular rigor mortis. Coupled with this distortion of the face, his Hippocratic smile, or risus sardonicus, as the old writers called it, what conclusion would it suggest to your mind? Death from some powerful vegetable alkaloid, I answered, some strychnine-like substance which would produce tetanus. I, again, swore that tetanus was a bacterial infection. Last week, during take 1 of this particular section, I did Google that, and tetanus is, in fact, the result of a bacterial infection, but I don't know that they knew that in the late 19th century. So it is entirely possible that understanding what exactly tetanus is and how that works might have been determined after this was written. That was the idea which occurred to me the instant I saw the drawn muscles of the face. On getting into the room, I at once looked for the means by which the poison had entered the system. As you saw, I discovered a thorn which had been driven or shot with no great force into the scalp. You observed that the part struck was that which would be turned towards the hole in the ceiling if the man were erect in this chair. Now examine this thorn. I took it up gingerly and held it in the light of the lantern. It was long, sharp, and black, with a glazed look near the point, as though some gummy substance had dried upon it. The blunt end had been trimmed and rounded off with a knife. Is that an English thorn? He asked. No, it is certainly not. With all these data, you should be able to draw some just inference. But here are the regulars, so the auxiliary forces may beat a retreat. As he spoke, the steps which had been coming nearer sounded loudly on the passage, and a very stout, portly man in a grey suit strode heavily into the room. He was red-faced, burly, and plethoric, with a pair of very small twinkling eyes which looked keenly out from between swollen and puffy pouches. He was closely followed by an inspector in uniform, and by the still palpitating Thaddeus Sholto. "Here's a business," he cried in a muffled, husky voice. "Here's a pretty business, but who all are these? Why, the house seems to be just as full as a rabbit warren." "I think you must recollect me, Mr. Athelney Jones," said Holmes quietly. "Why, of course I do," he wheezed. "It's Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the theorist. Remember you? I'll never forget how you lectured us all on causes and inferences and effects in the Bishopsgate jewel case. It's true you set us on the right track, but you'll own now that it's more by good luck than good guidance." It was a piece of very simple reasoning. "Oh, come now come. Never be ashamed to own up, but what is all this? Bad business, stern facts here, no room for theories. How lucky that I happened to be out at Norwood over another case. I was at the station when the message arrived. What do you think the man died of?" "Oh, this is hardly a case for me to theorize over," said Holmes dryly. No, still we can't deny that you hit the nail on the head sometimes. Dear me, door locked, I understand. Jewels worth $500,000 missing. How was the window?" "Fastened, but there are steps on the sill." Well, if it was fastened, the steps could have nothing to do with the matter. That's common sense. Man might have died in a fit, but then the jewels are missing. Ha! I have a theory. These flashes come upon me at times. Just step outside, Sergeant, and you, Mr. Sholto, your friend can remain. What do you think of this, Holmes? Sholto was on his own confession with his brother last night. The brother died in a fit, on which Sholto walked off with the treasure. How's that? On which the dead man very considerately got up and locked the door on the inside. There's a flaw there. Let us apply common sense to the matter. This Thaddeus Sholto was with his brother. There was a quarrel. So much we know. The brother is dead and the jewels are gone. So much we also know. No one saw the brother from the time Thaddeus left him. His bed had not been slept in. Thaddeus is evidently in a most disturbed state of mind. His appearance is, well, not attractive. You see that I am weaving my web round Thaddeus. The net begins to close upon him. You are not quite in possession of the facts yet, said Holmes. This splinter of wood, which I have every reason to believe to be poisoned, was in the man's scalp, where you still see the mark. This card, inscribed as you see it, was on the table, and beside it lay this rather curious stone-headed instrument. How does all that fit into your theory? Confirms it in every respect, said the fat detective pompously. House is full of Indian curiosities. Thaddeus brought this up, and if the splinter be poisonous, Thaddeus may well have made murderous use of it as any other man. The card is some hocus-pocus, a blind, as like as not. The only question is, how did he depart? Of course, here is a hole in the roof. With great activity considering his bulk, he sprang up the steps and squeezed through into the garret, and immediately afterwards we heard his exulting voice proclaiming that he had found the trap-door. He can find something, remarked Holmes, shrugging his shoulders. He has occasional glimmerings of reason. This is extremely in French. I recognize the word for spirit. You would want to imagine for Les Mis fandom reasons, but we all know damn well the reason I recognize the French word for spirit is for Homestuck reasons. I'm so normal and fine. "You see," said Athelney Jones, reappearing down the steps again, "facts are better than mere theories, after all. My view of the case is confirmed. There is a trapdoor communicating with the roof, and it is partly opened." It was I who opened it. "Oh, indeed, you did notice it, then?" He seemed a little crestfallen at the discovery. "Well, whoever noticed it, it shows how our gentleman got away, Inspector." "Yes, sir, from the passage." "Ask Mr. Sholto to step this way. Mr. Sholto, it is my duty to inform you that anything which you may say will be used against you. I arrest you in the Queen's name as being concerned in the death of your brother." "There now, didn't I tell you?" cried the poor little man, throwing out his hands and looking from one to the other of us. "Don't trouble yourself about it, Mr. Sholto," said Holmes. "I think that I can engage to clear you of the charge." "Don't promise too much, Mr. Theorist, don't promise too much," snapped the detective. "You may find it a harder matter than you think." "Not only will I clear him, Mr. Jones, but I will make you a free present of the name and description of one of the two people who were in this room last night. His name, I have every reason to believe, is Jonathan Small. He is a poorly educated man, small, active, with his right leg off, and wearing a wooden stump, which is worn away upon the inner side. His left boot has a coarse, square-toed sole, with an iron band around the heel. He is a middle-aged man, much sunburned, and has been a convict. These few indications may be of some assistance to you, coupled with the fact that there is a good deal of skin missing from the palm of his hand. The other man—" "Ah, the other man?" asked Athelney Jones in a sneering voice, but impressed nonetheless, as I could easily see by the precision of the other's manner. "Is a rather curious person," said Sherlock Holmes, turning upon his heel. "I hope before very long to be able to introduce you to the pair of them. A word with you, Watson." He led me out to the head of the stair. "This unexpected occurrence," he said, "has caused us rather to lose sight of the original purpose of our journey." "I have just been thinking so," I answered. "It is not right that Miss Morstan should remain in this stricken house." "No. You must escort her home. She lives with Miss Cecil Forrester in Lower Camberwell, so it is not very far. I will wait for you here, if you will drive out again. Or perhaps you are too tired." "By no means. I don't think I could rest until I know more of this fantastic business. I have seen something of the rough side of life, but I give you my word that this quick succession of strange surprises tonight has shaken my nerve completely. I should like, however, to see the matter through with you now that I have got so far." "Your presence will be of great service to me," he answered. "We shall work the case out independently, and leave this fellow Jones to exult over any mare's nest which he may choose to construct. When you have dropped Miss Morstan, I wish you to go on to number 3 Pinchin Lane, down near the water's edge at Lambeth. The third house on the right-hand side is a bird stuffer's. Sherman is the name. You will see a weasel holding a young rabbit in the window. Knock old Sherman up, and tell him, with my compliments, that I want Toby at once. You will bring Toby back in the cab with you." "A dog, I suppose?" "Yes, a queer mongrel, with a most amazing power of scent. I would rather have Toby's help than that of the whole detective force of London." "I shall bring him then," said I. "It is 1 now. I ought to be back before 3 if I can get a fresh horse." "And I," said Holmes, "shall see what I can learn from Mrs. Bernstone, and from the Indian servant who Mr. Thaddeus tell me sleeps in the next garret. Then I shall study the great Jones's methods and listen to his not too delicate sarcasms." That is extremely in German. Wir sind gewohnt, dass die Menschen verhöhnen, was sie nicht verstehen. I should be able to translate that off the top of my head, but it is 2 in the morning. And I exclusively studied German at 8 in the goddamn morning, a time which my brain is not functional at all. Yeah, my brain doesn't work until noon at the best, and I took 2 years of German in high school and 2 years of German in college. Most of my classes being at ungodly hours. And look, I know I probably have one of the weird sleep disorders that makes your, sleep cycle be entirely out of touch with, linear human time. I don't know that my insurance would pay for the testing for that, but I know that left to my own devices, my sleep cycle will get progressively more and more off by like 2 to 6 hours a day if I'm not forced to get up and interact with the world, but I'm able to mostly function because I luckily have a job working with tourists in which I often don't have to be up till noon, and like it's an irregular enough schedule that I can make it work, because yeah, I don't think my insurance would cover the amount of sleep tests it would take to prove that. So that's one of those like, yes, I am not meant to have a regular human sleep schedule. But you knew that because this stream was conducted from 1 to 2 a.m. Last sentence for the night. Goth is always pithy. We're gonna get back to chapter 7 next week because I said so. Good night.